a full out meta breakdown utilizing the Bastion versus Mayhem match as a kind of a backdrop, discussing a lot of the competitions that we've been seeing from Boston, from Florida, and all the other Overwatch League teams as well. I think with the current patch breakdown, because there's been so many changes at once, including the new hero, there's been a ton of variety in compositions that we've been seeing. And so I think it's tough to kind of follow exactly why a lot of these swaps have been made. I do my best to break down pretty much every single swap that you're going to see in this match and in other matches. If I miss anything, let me know in the comments. So I hope that you'll be able to utilize this video to not only further your understanding for the Overwatch League meta, but also maybe impact your ranked play as well. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and enjoy the video. Let's start off with this. Actually, I closed down Overwatch and I opened up Epic Pin, but I actually don't. I'm going to reverse. Now, I don't know how many of you guys saw my video yesterday on Violet's Illari, and if you didn't, then you need to watch it. But if you didn't, you don't necessarily have to watch it, because I'll give you the quick TLDR. The TLDR is you need to understand like what this hero actually does. And what this character actually does is she says no to Tracer, Sombra, those kind of things. We just came off of a Tracer Sombra meta, and her ability to headshot and like even just body shot squishies is really, it's a huge problem, especially for hit scan. In addition to that, because she has Pylon, and because she has her freaking shift, which knocks these characters back as well, she is an absolute demon to dive. She is so difficult to dive. And the interesting thing about it is, you think about heroes like Kiriko who are also hard to dive. Well, then how come, how come we still play dive? It's because Kiriko also enables dive very heavily. She has the mobility, she has the ranged healing, she can do all these core things. Illari doesn't. Turret doesn't help flankers. Turret helps herself. Her mobility is also relatively limited. It's more about booping you away than allowing her to move around the map a whole lot. Her gun, her ranged heal, it's not there. Her range heal isn't there at all. So she's one of the few examples of a character that is anti-dive without actually also enabling dive herself. Brig and Kiriko both enable dive as much as they disable dive. You guys kind of get what I'm saying? Armor packs, Kiriko range heal. Illari doesn't do any of that. So basically you have a hero that says no to dive. So you're like, all right, well then we can't just dive you. So what are we going to do? How do we play around that? And the entire meta is shifting around teams not being able to play Tracer Sombra because the threat of Illari stops you from doing that. Now you might say, but Spilo, they were playing Tracer. Well, we're going to get to that. Any questions that you have about this meta right now are probably going to be answered in the next 2.5 to 3 hours of this review. We're going to go in detail, not so much on the macro and the team play. I'm actually not as interested in looking about what team is better, and I want to talk about where is this meta gonna go, and use this game as backdrop, because I think it's probably the most interesting Overwatch League match in my memory, and maybe ever, in terms of answering the question of what matchups are, what rock paper scissors, what compositions are good, what compositions are bad, the maps, the heroes, the hero strengths. It's super interesting. So you can even look at it as so anyway, now I'm gonna go and give you guys a big fat juicy disclaimer. This is early meta, so it's very fun right now. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not gonna be a doomer, but I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I don't think the meta is going to stay this diverse. Right now, teams are figuring things out, and rock, paper, scissors is always way more important until teams figure out the solution. Not only figure out the solution, but they figure out how to dive in Illari. For example, Tracer Sombra might work into Illari, but you have to, right? And we don't know what that is yet, right? Winston is worse than Orisa unless you run. You kind of see what I'm saying? And we don't know what that is right now. Now, the reason I made the Houston video yesterday is because not only because I want to talk about it, because I think that is a very possible solution there. You slap a Kiriko onto a Tracer, well, now you have the sustain to give that Tracer the time to break Pylon. You have somebody that can also shoot the Illari. That Illari doesn't really do very good versus a Kiriko. So I think those are kind of the things that we're kind of looking for right now. Maybe the meta is going to shift more towards an Ana Kiriko, that counters the Illari, but then teams are just going to play Ana Brig because Ana Brig breaks Ana Kiriko, and then
get a shirtless stream
yeah, you're super funny. Thank you for the sub. We'll see. So I think we just have to wait and see. Now, obviously, none of this was made in a vacuum. There were a couple of small changes to Cassidy. Obviously, the HP thing was pretty significant as well. Orisa got a couple of tweaks. There were a lot of things that happened at once, so that's when these metas become really confusing. But you're going to see a lot of rock, paper, scissors that might not be relevant later, but will still be fun to analyze and talk about, and we'll have some discussion about how these matchups might be played. Okay, so let's take a look here. I'm going to turn it down. Let me know if the audio is too loud or too quiet. So let's talk about this composition right now. Now, why is Torbjorn being played? Well, Torb just got giga buffed. His fire rate is really strong. In addition, Torb does really well versus dive. And this is still a relatively dive-focused map with the amount of high ground and mobility allowed. So you want to play a character, then you might want to play Torbjorn with that character. So I would describe Florida Mayhem as like the quintessential new age anti-dive. And anti-dive spam tank that cannot be isolated in dove and can deny staging by spamming and harpooning. Anti-dive because spam, because turret, and the big thing that makes Torbjorn anti-dive is his overload, which is the defensive cooldown. When you play a heroes, you need to have a defensive cooldown. Obviously, Illari, we already talked about that. The reason why teams are running Baptiste over some of the other supports is Baptiste is self-sufficient. He can keep his Orisa alive. Now, you might go, isn't Baptiste pretty bad into full dive? I've been one of the people that's actually talked about how weak Baptiste actually is into full, like, Sombra Tracer Winston dive, but he's weak into full Sombra Tracer Winston dive. This is not full Sombra Tracer Winston dive. Sombra Tracer not being able to be played and a little bit less Winston now makes BAP's survivability a lot better. A BAP can handle a Winston. A BAP can even handle a Winston Tracer a little bit. He just struggles when there's a lot of things because lamp shift aren't going to matter anymore at that point in time. So he synergizes well that he's self-sufficient, that allow the Illari to kind of do whatever she wants. And that's the key thing. Illari needs to play however she wants. She needs to take her own angle, take her own high ground, maybe play with somebody else, but she wants to do her own thing. Now, there's the redheaded stepchild. No offense to any redheaded or stepchildren in my chat, all right? It's just a phrase. There's and this is Soldier. I think that Soldier is going to be a character that may or may not be phased out in some of these compositions. I don't like Soldier a lot of those times. I think Soldier is just not a very good character. Now, the reason why Soldier was being played a lot in a lot of these matchups is because Soldier can break. I think Soldier in the Illari mirrors can break turret consistently, can focus Illari consistently, and has his own self-sustain. But the guy just isn't very good versus any form of dive. The heal station isn't good. We talked about a stem pack maybe being something that Soldier could utilize so they can heal on the move. That would be a huge quality of life change. Anyway, Soldier is the odd man out right now. And I think that you're going to see that a lot on Flashpoint where Soldier doesn't look that good and something like a Sojourn looks better, or teams even remove the Soldier entirely and find a way to make Tracer work, even into the Illari. I just don't like Soldier very much. He fits because the meta is favoring him, not because he's a very strong character right now. That's the very important thing you have to understand. I want to actually make a video on that. We're going to talk about that on this Thursday on what makes a meta. Stay tuned for that on Thursday, and we'll talk a lot about that. But Soldier is a little bit the odd one out. Now let's talk about Boston. Now Boston's forcing dive. Boston's flicking amazing at dive. Top 3 probably. Top 3, top 4. And this is a really good map for if you were to play dive here. This would be the map. A lot of high ground. Stalker thing for the sub, mate.
Thanks to @Timothy for my sub gift.
Oh yeah. Cheers. Echo, a lot of high ground, a lot of mobility, some extra spam. You know, obviously we don't want to lean too hard into the Sombra Tracer here. On a Brig. Now this is the interesting thing here. All right. Now Brig, it's a short sightline map, so there will be some things for Brig to do. Brig can kind of push a little bit of Soldier, maybe whip shot on the Orisa, but our Brig is okay. I'm gonna use the term again. I need to get a better. Can somebody suggest something that I'm not? It's not that it's offensive. It's just like it's kind of boring. I need a better, funner analogy. Redhead stepchild. I'd say the fat kid, but that's not exactly better either. That's just as lame. But Brig is again the odd man out. Odd man out. Black sheep. Sure. Odd man out. Brig is also the odd man out here, right? Because Brig is there to peel what? Now they might have been expecting a mirror here, which is why they roll out Brig, the ugly duckling. Sure. But she just doesn't fit. She just doesn't do much. It is a shorter sightline map, so she can push people a little bit, but she just doesn't fit. This is where you guys can probably guess, what should this character be? if you're Bastion, who should this be? Got any ideas? Got any ideas? Because Brig is about to be a big problem. Kiriko, exactly. This should be Kiriko if they knew they were on this composition. You pair your Kiriko up with Tracer and with Echo, you're able to take this entire side of the map and actually poke these guys out. I had a great YouTube comment yesterday that asked, like, what's the difference between dive and spam if dive ends up just taking these off angles and spamming people out? There isn't that much of a difference, actually. Everything is about map control. The difference between dive and spam is you have hyper mobile characters that can take positions like these without dying. That's the real difference, right? So, I mean, you could honestly even run a Mercy here in a way, but it's probably too greedy. But yeah, anyway, long story short, the Brig just doesn't fit in this kind of matchup. And you're going to see a lot of awkward support situations where this kind of stuff happens. They roll out on this, and all of a sudden, Brig is useless. All of a sudden Brig is useless. And what do you do, right? So let's okay, so then this is where you can really tell like the meta has shifted a little bit, because this is where you would see you would see some alternative comps here, because this is a pretty narrow map, and so we would see spam here sometimes, but like it's going full Widowmaker. Now, I don't like the Torb here. I'm not sure if this was we're not sure what composition they're going to roll out on, but I think something like a Sojourn would have been okay as well. Obviously, Bird Ring just is smoking crack. Again, Bap, Kiri, Orisa Mirror, because spam map, not very good for dive, not a lot of, way too many sightlines. The Sojourn is definitely an interesting one. I don't think Sojourn is that good, so maybe that's where the thought process. Now, okay, I think somebody's on the wrong hero right now. Can anybody point out to me who's on the wrong hero here? Now, this is totally subjective. This is just my opinion, but can you tell me who's on the wrong hero here? This might take a little bit of hero pool knowledge and a little bit of macro knowledge. Yeah, got caught in the ult rotations and didn't want to swap and lose it. Now, I think the tanks are fine. I think Orisa's okay. I think you could maybe retake with Sigma, but I think that's too greedy and you could get counter swapped. I think Orisa's the safer pick. Lige going on Bap, I think that's okay as well. They're not playing a flanker, so you don't necessarily need the Kiriko, and unless you're Violet, you're not going to get as much value. Decay is good on hit scan. Now, you could argue that there are maybe other heroes besides Sojourn when you're playing into a Widowmaker, but I don't think Decay is necessarily on their own. Now, yeah, it's Checkmate. I think Checkmate's on the wrong hero. Chat, what should Checkmate switch? Now, Checkmate started on Torb, and he goes, I'm not playing this into this composition. They're on Widow, Sojourn, Bap. What should Checkmate be on? Now, I would think there are two options. I think Hanzo is a little bit greedy, although actually not a bad suggestion. I think Hanzo is maybe not as meta and maybe a little bit too greedy. You could get counter swapped if you go Hanzo. But I actually think that's a pretty good option. I think it's Mei or Genji. You look at this composition, this is exactly what you want to play Genji into. I mean, obviously there's a lot of defensive cooldowns, but those defensive cooldowns are very safe. You have a lot of value out of your ability to close the distance. And he's a very good Genji. I don't know why he plays Sojourn here. Mei is basically, this is just a good map for Mei because it's like a poke hero with survivability and utility, and Checkmate's Mei is ridiculous. He's very, very good at Mei. So it's more of a comfort pick. I wouldn't say the average DPS player should play Mei here, but I think it makes sense given his hero pool. So I don't like the Sojourn. I don't think you're going to be able to do enough tank pressure. I think you're really scared of Widowmaker. I don't think you're going to be able to use your mobility at all. I think this is almost exclusively spam matchup. So why not play something like a Genji or a Mei? Genji who could actually use his mobility, and Mei who could actually utilize her spam / her wall utility. Now, Jake doesn't like this composition, but I'm going to disagree with Jake. And we're going to revisit this composition style later. Not exactly the DPS, not exactly the support and Illari, but we're going to revisit the whole Doomfist Lucio idea later because it's actually good. It's actually good. See, there's two ways of beating Illari, okay? You either spam her or you rush on top of her. You don't dive her in poker with Tracer. You get something with speed on top of her. And I actually think that she's pretty fragile if you're able to do that. It's hard to do that. So this composition is definitely a panic, we have to go back and touch point. That's why they're on these heroes. Let's be very clear. But it's better than you think on maps when you can actually get close to people, which is why you're going to see it on Flashpoint later. So long story short, Smurf is a good Doom. It's definitely a little bit of a messy synergy thing, but let's say Doomfist goes in aggressively with Lucio, Twilight takes an angle, these guys take an angle, it can work just fine. I think this composition, there are many worse OT touch comps you could do. Okay, so let's talk about these compositions. Now, this is not new, what the Mayhem have pulled out. This is not the first time we've seen this composition. It is a variation of a TP and Turtle on point. The reason why they run the Kiriko Moira and not the Lucio is obviously most importantly because Maka doesn't play Lucio. He's their second flex support. But we've actually seen most teams migrate away from the Lucio in this composition because really this comp doesn't necessarily need the Lucio speed. It's going to do one of two things. It's going to sit in Turtle on point, in which case the AoE healing of something like a Kiriko or something else will be more valuable, or something like a Suzu, or it's going to TP on top of somebody, in which case the TP is their speed boost. You don't need the speed boost to pursue beyond that. So I think this is a pretty reasonable comp from Mayhem. This is a pretty reasonable answer from Boston. They're going to send Birdring back to spawn and put him on Ashe, and this is fine. I think this is going to be more about execution than anything else with these teams. This, you could close your eyes, and this would be previous patch. This would be fine. These compositions are not something that are like brand new. This is something that we've seen before, and both teams' responses are fine. They can obviously get point flip. You see different off angles set up from both DPS. Ashe here, Ashe goes high. Winston here, Echo on the angle, Ana on the angle. Now, obviously, the Brig here is a little bit awkward. You could play this with a Kiri. Would be nice if you wanted to greed into Mercy, you could. The reason why most teams don't greed into Mercy is because then when Mayhem swap back to like dive on retake, the Mercy is really, really not very good. Let's take a look here. So basically, here's what we have. Florida is running now. This is, I'm convinced, a point-specific strategy that's been pushing up. We've been seeing a lot of Sigma. Now, why Sigma would be played on a map like this is because wide open sightline, long sightlines on the backline, and self-sufficiency. Now, you're asking, well, then why didn't we see some Sigma before? Well, because Sigma is butt cheeks into Winston, Sombra, Tracer. He can do absolutely nothing besides try to control the Ana a little bit. He's terrible. He's absolutely terrible. But if we don't see those compositions because of Illari and the Sombra nerfs, then you can greed the Sigma out. We've even seen Sigma attack. Now, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I think this is a bit of a gimmick. I can see Sigma working here, but I still feel that it is a little too one-dimensional, and I think it could be punished by wrapping around. I think you could even see Boston running that on a Kiriko strategy I was talking about earlier and finding success. I think this composition would struggle into a Kiriko Tracer or a Soldier, or a Kiriko Echo with an Ana. I think when you go this far into the greed, you leave yourself open to being countered. So I don't expect this to be something that stays for very long, but I might be wrong. Echo here just because verticality, Illari just because, good support combo because Illari can do whatever she wants, and Batiste can keep the tank alive while keeping himself alive. I think here with Boston, let's see what Boston rolls out on here. Okay, so they commit to here. Boston is basically trying to do a budget version of what I was talking about, where they send their Winston, or their Winston, I don't know why I said quotes, but they send their dive tank or a dive hero on the flank with a Kiriko. And then what they do is that they then have the rest of the team take off angles and spam out from different sightlines. Now the Hanzo, I don't think is anything but a first fight cheese. You can put Hanzo right here. Really, really, really nasty. Soldier, you're not going to get any space. You need that verticality. So I think Boston's comp is okay. It's okay. And the reason why you run a Diva over a Winston here is because you look at these heroes. Echo might be difficult to dive. This guy might be difficult to dive. But most importantly, if you run Winston, you kind of want to run it with an Ana. And if you want to run a Kiriko to go on a flank, and you still want to run Illari, Diva demands less healing than a Winston, so this combo makes more sense. I mean, we're getting really complicated, guys. I told you this was going to get complicated. That's the mate part. Okay. All right. Here's the juice, all right? Hold on to your buttocks. Boston's composition is pretty good. You have a Ana Winston on a really good Ana Winston point, even post, you know, Sombra Tracer nerfs, okay, or whatever. All right. Illari plays her own angle. Echo, good point for her. Soldier, good range for him. Florida is really rolling the dice with this composition, because I'm telling you, if Izayaki hits a big nade and times it with Smurf plus stickies from Decay, it's over. What I want to see is how is Boston positioned for this? This is walkout, turret, clear high ground. Soldier's positioned well. Winston takes too much damage. Oh no. Okay, so Izayaki's mispositioned. Okay, so this is kind of what we're talking about, right? Like you're gonna go full in spam. So then we're gonna go, all right, well, I can't play Illari into this because I'm just gonna get shot by Hanzo. So I'm gonna go Kiriko and flank, right? Which is the weakness, right? Yeah, I mean, then you slap an extra dive character, you pair these guys up, you have this guy on an angle, this guy pockets this guy. I really do think that both of these compositions have some logic. The reason they go Zen is because they are confident that on this point anyway, they can keep their Zenyatta in a safe spot, far enough away. Now, if there was one swap here, I think you would see them go off Zen. I think if you saw Decay on Tracer plus Kiriko, I think that's too hostile for Zen. I think it's too hostile for Zen.
Smurf is over to the Diva, so I feel like Diva Genji feel pretty good.
Still very greedy for Mayhem. I want to be very clear. Checkmate goes May, more of a comfort pick for him. Basically, okay, here, let me try and describe to you what May is. May is just her own thing. I don't know how to describe it. It's like when you play May at a really high level, it's not about like, oh, brawl, wall tank, push tank. You could do anything. You can go flank by yourself because you have self-sustain and like poke out the Genji. You can ego Hanzo if your mechanics are really good. You can't be one-shot anymore. Keep that in mind. You can wall off follow-up from the Ana. You can mark the Kiriko on a flank. Like, May is such a versatile DPS here. She doesn't have, like, outside of Brawl, like, a super, like, dominant strength. But especially if you're really good at it, like Checkmate, there's a lot of things that you can do with May. You can wall to high ground and take high ground away. Like, there's a lot of little things that you can take. So Checkmate's just like, Hanzo is, like, a little bit too fragile versus this stuff. So I'm going to go less fragile DPS that has a lot of flexibility and doesn't really demand a lot of support. May is the perfect pick. Why is Tracer more hostile than Genji? Because Genji, it's harder for Genji to get on top of Zenyatta if Zenyatta's positioning well. He'll play kind of far back, and Genji can't quite reach him. Genji can't go on a flank by himself that long. He'll get scouted. Tracer can, though. Especially with Kiriko pocket.
Somewhat super low. Jeez.
That's a limit test.
Yeah, actual limit test. 50 HP or something like that.
So the Bastion is definitely the odd man out, especially with this Diva swap right here. I don't remember what happens here, but the Bastion just isn't particularly good. I really like, I mean, this is exactly what we said was going to happen, right? Kiriko, Genji on the flank, on a Diva up top, Hanzo just kind of shooting wherever. And so it's pretty easy for Hanzo here for them to just choke them out. There's an Nano Blade. So I think it's more about the hero competence and less about like, oh, their macro was bad. It's like, this is just total chaos. But in that chaos, you have to find a rhyme or reason with what you're doing, and Boston was not able to do it. Is Bastion meta? Very, very situational and still extremely cheesy. To be perfectly frank, given that situation on that map, Boston should be kicking themselves for losing that.
Keep each other alive, outlast the dive,
now, and the funny thing is that Florida are now once again in a situation where their comp is actually pretty good. In fact, that's why Twilight goes Zen here, is because, again, fewer flanks on third point, so you'd rather just have the raw spam on main. And we're on to Flashpoint. Now, this is where I really wanted to talk a little bit about some of the compositions that we're seeing here. Oh, Junker Queen Flashpoint. Junker Queen Flashpoint. Okay, so let's talk about Flashpoint, all right? There's a lot of variables at play. Speed, very useful. Getting from point A to point B, getting out of spawn, super useful. Speed in general, not just Lucio, very useful. Getting from point A to point B. The other thing you guys have to understand about Flashpoint is, especially on some of the points, I had a question the other day. Was it, oh, who was it from? Was it from I don't remember who was it from. I had a coaching session. And the guy asked me, he's like, how do you position on Flashpoint? I think it was like, and I was like, there are no positions to memorize most of the time. You really have to kind of respond like with where your team is rotating to and where the enemy team is rotating to. Because a lot of these points, you don't really know. It might be here, it might be there, it might be here, it might be there. And again, that kind of goes to my point where like speed is super valuable, because you look at something like an Ana, she might be too slow. So if you rotate here, but the enemy team rotates here, you got to get your grandma, you got to pull up your skirt, you know, you got to go, wait for me, you know, you got to move, girl. And Kiriko is just really freaking good at that. You know what I'm saying? And Ana's not. And so that's why you're seeing this setup, is because having supports that can move, rotate, and proactively take space super fast is super valuable. And that's also why you're seeing things like Doomfist. Because Doomfist doesn't need to wait for his Winston bubble. He doesn't need proper staging. He just goes wherever he wants to go, right? And that's also why you see Junker Queen. She's got her own inherent speed boost. She's a lot more flexible to positioning. And if you're going to be running a Kiriko Lucio backline, there are only so many tanks that you can run. Junker Queen, Doom, and Orisa to a lesser extent. Orisa's a little bit harder because she demands a little bit more healing, but it's doable. So you start with your support lineup needing to be flexible. And your DPS line also needs to be flexible. But I think DPS is like less, like you can play Soldier, Sojourn, Genji, Tracer. There's like a lot of heroes that can work with Kiriko Lucio, right? So that's the key takeaway. That's why we're seeing these compositions right here. Now, what's interesting is some of the different reads of this matchup, right? So, for example, Birdring prefers Sojourn over Soldier. I think that's reasonable. Sojourn doesn't demand a lot of healing. There isn't a lot of poke damage that prevents her from building rail in these Kiriko Lucio compositions. If they go dive, which is very popular on Flashpoint. Now, why is dive popular on Flashpoint and not Illari? Well, because, okay, here we go. All right. Why are teams not running Illari bunker on Flashpoint? Why? We've seen it a little bit. We even heard that from Scrimbox. It was more popular before Illari got nerfed. But why are teams not running BAP, Illari, Orisa, Torb? Why is it? Too many flanks and angles, slow to rotate, too many angles. Why on Flashpoint, right? You can't bunker because you have to move so much. Exactly. The other thing as well, guys, all right, look. The problem, the weakness of Illari, you guys talk about Ana Brig, okay? They're posturing in the back line. They're pocketing their Winston, and Winston dives, Sombra dives, Tracer dives, right? Illari says, screw off. No, you cannot do that. Well, everybody's gangster until Ana puts on her jogging shorts and Brig puts on her speed skates and zooms in with the dive. And then Illari isn't saying no, Illari is saying no, because she gets trucked, absolutely smoked. So my point here is that when you can get the backline involved in pushing with the dive, Illari gets run over. You get run over. The turret doesn't matter if you're running her over with like 4 or 5 people. So it's not just because speed boost allows you to rotate and set up angles and speed from point A to point B. Speed boost also allows you to just get on top of her and run her over. And these maps are, while they feel open in spots, generally around point, it's a little bit congested. It's kind of short sightlines. So it's pretty easy. Like if you were to roll out an Illari Bat Brig here or something like that, or Bat Illari, this composition would run you over, at least in theory. Now, I still think it's tricky. I think it's tricky enough that I would not be surprised if we saw some teams try and Bat Illari. In fact, what is it? There's one Korean contenders team that's finding success with it, but it's a lot harder on these maps because it is pretty easy for this composition to get really close and run you over, and this composition to get pretty close and run you over. So a 5-man dive is good against Illari? Yes, exactly. Even Brawl, like I'm not surprised at all to see London still forcing Ryan comps on these maps because now again, am I confident? No, but in theory, a Ryan comp when played really well can still push down an Illari. She would have to like take an angle or something like that. So now, why are they Genji instead of Reaper? Okay, you've really tickled the giblets right there. I'm not gonna lie with you. Because Okay, there's so many different ways where this meta could go. I really don't know where you're going to go. I think Kiriko, Lucio are not here to stay necessarily, but are probably going to remain relatively popular on this one. All right? Everything else is up for grabs. Everything else is up for grabs. I don't like Soldier. I think Soldier's good because he's super fast and because he has nice poke damage. But unless you're getting nice poke damage, if he gets pressured, Soldier just has to run. Sojourn's slide is 10 times better, but Sojourn doesn't have the poke damage. So I honestly could see either one. I personally favor the Sojourn just a little bit, but also Sojourn's a lot worse versus Orisa, I think, because of the lack of pressure damage. Genji is more because, hey, Genji good versus Soldier and Sojourn is okay. But what happens if we stop seeing Orisa? What happens if it becomes a Winston mirror? Then all of a sudden, guys, we're back in 2022 OWL Grand Finals. I think we would go back to Reaper Sojourn. I think there's a real chance. And then if we see like Doomfist or Orisa staying or Junker Queen, then we probably don't see Reaper because Reaper is gonna be spending half the map chasing Doomfist around the map, and he doesn't want to play versus Orisa. Orisa's not a good matchup for Reaper, so then we probably see more Genji or Sojourn. You know? So I think like it's gonna depend on teams are gonna keep jockeying back and forth with these different variations, where both of these variations are technically currently meta right now, but everything's up for change. I might review Contenders EU Finals. So I don't know. I think we got a lot here. I don't like the one problem about going back to Grand Finals and why I think that there is a chance of it, but I wouldn't say it's for sure going to happen, is because Winston Kiri does not have a very good synergy like it used to. Kiriko's HPS got nerfed too hard, and Winston with Kiriko is hard. You have to play super disciplined. You know what I'm saying? So like it's hard. That's why a lot of teams are running the Orisa and they're running the JQ, because it's freaking hard to run Winston with Kiriko. Yeah. I think like Apollify was saying, thank you, Jasmosis Jones. I just don't like the Soldier that much. I don't like the Soldier that much. I think the Soldier is probably really, really good if they're not on Winston. I think if I see Winston, I immediately want Sojourn. And if I see Doomfist even, I think I immediately want Sojourn as well. I think Junker Queen, Orisa may be a little bit slower, so you can get that range damage put out more, but that shift just becomes so valuable. So anyway, that's TLDR why teams aren't playing as much Illari here. I don't think Illari is dead here, but remember, you really cannot run Illari Lucio, because you can't heal your Winston. You could run it with an Orisa maybe, but you just have no ranged heal option at all, and so it really hurts. Anyway, am I an avid Cloudy watcher by any chance? I'm a big fan of Cloudy. I did a collaboration with him not too long ago. He's a smart guy. Good guy too. So that's why no Illari. I hope that kind of makes sense. Speed important. Being able to run over Illari with 5-man, whether that's Winston, Orisa, Junker Queen, Doomfist, is really strong. I think Doomfist, I actually think like if you're a really good Doomfist, I freaking love Doomfist on this mode. I think Doomfist is busted with Kiriko Lucio. There's just not a lot of damage that can kill you, so I think it's really good.
The two-person dive will be beautiful, but getting spear spun and like,
so you're gonna notice here like how much more aggressively these guys are postured with the Sojourn, right? And how much more defensively Merit, for example, is positioned, right? Way further back, way more range damage, and then he gets railed. That's so tragic. Poor guy.
Okay, what if Flora gonna? Okay, it looks like Florida is just gonna instantly disengage. They know they
I mean, the Soldier, it's tough because you can do a lot of damage to tanks as Soldier. I think that's the main value of Soldier in this particular matchup is you could, even Orisa takes a lot of damage from Soldier, right? But if you are unable to get an angle without being dove, you know, and then rail becomes a problem. I think this is where I think this is maybe where it comes to the hero strengths, but a Sojourn swap here, it needed to happen. This is where Florida lost this map. Okay, you roll out on Soldier because you might see JQ, you might see Orisa, heck, you might even see Illari, where like a Soldier would be really, really good to have that self-sustained solo flank, break the turret, right? Better than Sojourn. But as soon as you see this, I think you're trolling if you don't go Sojourn. You don't lose any old charge. I think this is a mistake.
capitalize on having all of
I'm talking about it right now, Smithsonian. We had a nice long conversation about it. You just missed it.
Mirror match on the Winston, he felt maybe that was a stronger
I think the Sojourn versus the Winston is just feels so good, and especially when you go Winston of your own, I just see no reason for it. Because you could run an Orisa and just like put perma pressure on their Winston to prevent him from diving your soldier, but then now, especially now that you've gone Winston, you need Sojourn.
those chokes could be easy to get punished there.
Because again, you guys look at this and like, oh my gosh, like look how much damage he's doing, right? But nothing dies. And then if Bastion lives and they pop Kiriko ult or use their dive, you get run over. Or you run and do nothing. That's the thing. It's the difference between Soldier and Sojourn. Soldier can live, but he has to run. He can't shoot and run at the same time. I wouldn't say. And this is where we get the juice, guys. This is where we get the juice. Reaper Sojourn, we're back, baby. We're back. I like this, man. I like this. Like, if you're look. Here's the thing. Why would you play? I mean, Genji, I think is actually pretty good versus Soldier, but like you could just abuse the enemy Winston and Kiriko Lucio. Like, I think the Reaper's good. I think the Reaper's okay. It's definitely Reaper is always a meta pick, not a meta setter. In other words, Reaper is never strong enough to force a comp build around him. He just happens to synergize really well with the hero picks. You know what I'm saying? But hey, I actually think it's fairly reasonable. It's fairly reasonable. Brig Lucio and APAC. Honestly, Brig Lucio isn't terrible. You would need to run it with JQ, obviously, or Doomfist, but it could work. Same kind of thing, right? Brig is not exactly the slowest support in the game anymore. Not with new shield bash, right? And obviously you have packs for your DPS on angles, so it can work. Kiriko. Why do they say play Soldier so much? It's because I don't think Soldier's bad. I just don't think he's the optimal pick. And I also don't think he's the optimal pick in this particular situation. You guys have to understand that we have the power of hindsight right now. Like, we're going back and we're going, oh, because they're on Winston and, you know, whatever. And that's just our best guess. But if they roll out an Orisa, right, I think Soldier's probably better than Sojourn in a lot of the circumstances. And so what happens is in the heat of the match, or just the comfort pick, or that's what he's been playing. So that's what he's playing, you know? Here, so finally, Florida have seen the light. They are on the OWL Grand Finals composition. Birdring is almost certainly going to swap to Sojourn? Probably is the safe guess here.
Playoffs matter. Here we go, baby.
Could be Tracer as well. Not a terrible Tracer map. Oh, they stay. Oh, that's right, chat. I forgot. They stayed. Okay. Let's talk about the Symmetra pick. It's freaking weird, guys. It's freaking weird. But there's some logic behind it, all right? First things first, I don't like this composition versus this composition. I think this composition should just go, see ya, use their mobility to get away, and they just stand there and look stupid. Right? I also think that when they don't have TP, these guys are very fragile to a dive. Now, I will say that Reaper isn't exactly the choice pick for this situation. It's more of a mirror matchup, and I promise you that Checkmate was on Reaper because they were expecting mirror. So Boston has kind of pulled some shenanigans out of there. And here's the question. Why would you run Junker Queen with a Sim and not Reinhardt? And please don't say, oh, because Smurf doesn't want to play Reinhardt, because that's the obvious and easy answer. But we want something complicated, overly complicated, because it's fun. What does Junker Queen do to Symmetra? Shout, yes. I don't think Symmetra really freaking cares about a Rhine barrier when you're playing versus a Winston, Sojourn, Kiriko, Lucio that's going to run on top of you. You want the shout. Right. So you TP plus shout so you can survive the teleport, and that's exactly what I think we're going to see. If I remember correctly. I almost forgot about this composition. I'm not going to lie to you guys. So is it cheesy? Yes. Is it going to work? I don't know. We'll find out. Junker Queen good also to bully Winston? Exactly. Yep. So Boston's comp is weird. Okay. There is a character here that I don't love. Actually, you know what? No, frick. Like, okay, I don't love BAP, but you kind of want BAP because you need shift and lamp for the Symmetra, because that helps keep the Symmetra up. But then Genji's weird because Genji's kind of anti. Like this composition's just a mess. It's a mess. There's a lot of synergy. There's a lot of anti-synergy. So yeah, let's just see. Why not Bastion instead of Genji? Yeah. Honestly, yeah. Because Bastion has the survivability. He also benefits from Shift and Lamp and with the armor overheal, or the armor heal. Yeah. It could work. Kiriko would work if they weren't on Symmetra. But you need BAP and Lamp, Shift and Lamp to keep the Symmetra up. So I feel like Boston should like hard commit to either Bastion Sim with BAP, Junker Queen, or go like Kiriko and do like, I don't know, like Tracer Genji, Sojourn Genji, something like that. But, you know, we'll see. This is gonna work. Decay is gonna go Reaper, which is fine. I think this is like kind of like, really you can look at this and be like, these are just basically different variations of the same comp, just different flavors. Mei versus Reaper, hero comfort picks. I do think the Mei does very, very nicely versus the Junker Queen, but I also think that the Reaper does very well versus the Winston. In fact, the only character that doesn't make sense here is the Baptiste, because I don't think you need that sustain, and he's pretty fragile himself, but the only reason he's staying is because BAP window. So this is where we get a little bit funny here. Obviously, Florida loves their Widow Echo. I think this is a really good point pick here. I think there's a lot of nice, juicy sightlines for Widow. I think this is also, the verticality is phenomenal for Echo. The Bat Brig is more of a situational pick. I think it's because you're like running Diva to contest high ground, so that allows RuPaul to just kind of play his own character. And then Brig can enable the DPS while being able to discourage the dives from the Winston. The reason why you're not running on a Brig is because you don't freaking need to if you're running Diva. And also there's nothing that's really super, super valuable to Nano either. So there's a lot more of like, it's like, I would describe these 3 picks, and honestly really these 4 picks, as being like point situational, map situational things that we've seen from. Stop calling me a short king! Okay, anyway, and then Boston on the flip side is just basically running anti, super spam heavy. Honestly, I do feel like Boston could have gotten away with a Widow on defense here too, because if you have your Echo to guard the back door, the flank, it's really hard to get onto a Widow on the high ground. So, I don't know. I think Boston's comp is actually fairly reasonable though, so. Again, this is just where the Soldier is just such an awkward pick. You know, it just doesn't do anything besides doesn't die immediately. You know, it doesn't deal with the Widow. It doesn't deal with the Echo all that well. It doesn't really put a lot more pressure on tank because the tank is Diva and there aren't really that good sightlines, because any sightline that you want to take as a Soldier, Widow's just going to take better. Now, obviously running a defensive composition is really tough because you have to counter every potential composition they could run out on, because we could be saying, oh, you know, they shouldn't be running Soldier, and then they run like some crazy dive comp, you know, and then, you know, we wish we had Soldier. But I honestly don't think that's the case here. I think the amount of times that we've seen Soldier here, I'm hoping that we're going to see these teams move away from Soldier, because I think there's always going to be a slightly better niche pick that fits better. Charlong's going to get off of Brig because the verticality is a big problem, so you need something with verticality. Checkmate is going to go Tracer as well, because this map is so freaking wide that anything with mobility is helpful, even if the enemy team is playing Illari. So I think Tracer is the play here. Okay. Now, this is when we get to the Clown Fiesta again. For the last time, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know what this is. There are not a lot of flanks that are available on this point. And so let's just push card and spam. I'm not going to lie to you. I don't think this is optimal. This is a classic Florida special where they run something suboptimal, but because it makes at least a little bit of sense on the point, because it's nice and wide, not a lot of good flanks, and because these guys have never seen this, they fumble the bag. Guys, Sigma Bastion is not the optimal meta composition on 3rd point Dorado. It's not. But Florida's been doing this all season long. It's good enough and weird enough so they don't know what to do. And it also is at a terrible time too, because Smurf honestly should stay Winston here, or go Diva. I think Diva would be the play here. I don't love the Orisa pick, actually. I think Sigma into Orisa is pretty decent for Sigma. Orisa's not a bad choice here, But yeah, so they're just gonna force cart. They're just gonna force cart. Tracer can control the off angle by herself, because they don't really have any off angle presence here, right? Like this is when you kind of would love to see something like an Ana Kiri or an Illari Kiri instead of an Ana. I think Ana's fine, but yeah. Okay, let's juice up. Florida Mayhem composition. We've already talked about it. Crap, did I talk about this on stream before? I feel like I did. It's been a while though. Merit, high ground, way back. Checkmate, Echo, basically because the point is good for Echo, but also if they wanted to counter and flank the Widowmaker, the Echo can actually control that flank and prevent them from doing that. It's really easy to scout it when you're running an Echo as well. Diva, stop cart, control space, mark, pressure. Bat Brig, again, just point specific. If this was more open, you'd run Ana Brig or Bap Kiri or Bap Illari, but it's not, so you just basically turtle Bap, and you don't need the Ana when you're running Diva. So, yeah. This is a major, major throw from Bastion, though. Ignoring some of the mistakes that Twilight makes on Brig, ignoring some of the old economy mistakes, they basically commit Nano Primal while down. Nano Primal is how you beat this composition because it kills 1, 2, or 3 of these targets. All 3 of these targets should just be dead versus Nano Primal. Unless they have Rally, and even if they have Rally, it's over. The problem is they fumble the Nano Primal, and there is an imposter among us, okay? There's an imposter among us. Somebody on Bastion is on the wrong hero. And this is not the first time that we've had this issue with Bastion in this series. Can anybody tell me what the issue is here? I don't like the Brig. I don't like the Brig. I understand that Brig is not necessarily the worst choice here. There is a Diva, there is an Echo that could potentially dive, packs are still useful for your Echo and Ana as well. It's not a bad choice. But when you consider the map, when you consider the person playing the composition, and that it's really not that good of a pick into the enemy composition, it's just okay. I just don't understand this at all. I see no reason why this should be run at all. This screams Ana, Kiriko. Kiriko to flank, Kiriko to pocket your Echo, Kiriko to hard pressure Widow. It's not amazing for Kiriko, even the verticality of the map, right? But it just has to be better than this. It has to be better than this. And I don't know if this is just like Twilight's not as comfortable on Kiriko or what, but this is a major problem. I hope that if nothing else you guys got from this match, like the nuances of the rock, paper, scissors, the comps, the counter comps, Illari's impact, way of playing around Illari. Really fun match to watch, but also I think probably the most impactful or interesting match when it comes to like counter comps, especially for a handful of those maps that we may have ever seen. Like I think this was an unbelievable variety of compositions that really demonstrated some of the potential new metas that we may be seeing. The only thing that we didn't really see from either team a lot is I would have liked to have seen some Ana Kiri dive. Houston was whipping that one out. I would love to see if we see more of that in the future. Does Din still have a place with Illari? I think it's possible. I just think, I talked about this in my Ana Kiriko video yesterday. I think you have to be careful still versus like Tracers, even with Illari. Like she's still a threat. So Zen Illari is possible, but you really lack tank damage and you really lack peel for the Zen. You don't really have either. So it's like hyper greedy. Brig Illari. I just don't think Illari needs the Brig is the problem, right? You don't need the Brig. You have your own defensive cooldowns that keep you alive, so you don't need the Brig. So you can greed value elsewhere. Like you guys can go back now and look at all these compositions and be like, yeah, why are teams running Kiriko Lucio? Well, because if you didn't run like Kiri Lucio, you would not, if you ran like Ana Lucio or Ana Brig, you would just lose to Illari. So then you see these more like Lucio oriented non-tracer compositions. My question is, are we going to see tracers sneak back in as teams get more comfortable not playing in Illari? Because like, does tracer work in the mirror? right? She doesn't work versus Illari, but what if they're both running Lucio comps? Does Tracer still work? I know she doesn't have any sort of range pocket. And then like this here, like here's your Illari spam. So what do Glads do? Well, they go full Lucio speed brawl. They're running down this composition, right? And I think, if I remember correctly, it works pretty well. I didn't really watch this match. I mostly skimmed it. But yeah, I mean, it works reasonably well. Yeah, and then... So I think Glads maybe out-comped them a little bit here. Maybe. I think it's hard to say like how good the Illari is into Lucio. And then I think this map is relatively competitive, and you can really see that like Glads limit testing the Lucio stuff, right? One of my buddies, you know, guys know Cager, right? Like he was talking about like he wondered if Zarya Lucio would be functional into these compositions, and it definitely seemed like Glads were trying. Obviously kind of a tough map for it outside of first point, but they found like mixed success with it. And then they managed to get to third point, where then you can just run them over again with Lucio's speed. The question is Illari going to do enough damage to like actually counter the Lucio speed on these like tight congested areas? Because what you really have to do is you have to kind of like park yourself on an angle and spam behind. But do you do enough damage for that to actually matter, right? Like you can look at this here, like, right? Like look at Lucio and Genji working together, right? But does Illari and like Torb or Illari Soldier win that 2v2? I mean, obviously mechanics play a very important factor. So I don't know. I thought this one was relatively competitive, if I remember correctly. I just kind of like felt like New York kind of fumbled the bag at points in time. Again, to look at them run the Lucio, even on second point, right? Utilizing that high ground, anywhere New York rotates, you just run right at Fitz. You run right at creative, they just die. And then here, like, right, like this is where like New York goes like, I think this is like a little bit ambitious. Like I'm honestly not sure if this composition can function super well. Like I think for this composition to function into the Orisa with Torb, I think you have to be like super like disciplined. Because like if Winston can get on top of these guys, it can work. But geez, you take so much damage. Like you take so much damage. Yeah, I don't know. I actually think Doomfist could be better here, because at least you could have a better job avoiding damage. But obviously you have to really avoid the Orisa. The Illari Lucio is really interesting as well, because it's like hyper greeting damage into Winston, right? You lose a lot of sustain, but it's more damage on Winston than Kiriko, I think. So I think it goes Doomfist, which I actually liked. But you have to play like super well, and then Kevster makes a really brilliant swap to Sombra, and then it's rough. So I just think Glads played it better. So yeah.